Ellen Venture is a for striking Win, where she looked like a young teen.
What is
It is.
happening? What is happening?
The Lord of the Rings isn't all that great and might be the most boring piece of fantasy ever. People are pulling no punches. What is going on? You guys are savage. I asked you guys about your unpopular opinions or hot takes, and I received so many comments. So I've invited Fun Fantasy Books to give us our reactions on your hot takes. How are you doing, Isa?
Oh, good. So excited.
And we have made signs that say agree or disagree. So whenever I read an opinion, if we agree, disagree, we'll put up the sign. An unneeded romance can ruin an excellent plot, and I feel that a lot of times in YA fantasy. Oh man, I strongly agree. One thing I think we really need more of in fantasy is just having really great friendships. I mean, I recently watched Lord of the Rings trilogy or The Fellowship of the Ring, and I just love that Frodo and Sam are just like really great friends, and there's nothing
Yeah.
more to it. So yeah, I do definitely agree, and it's probably one of the reasons why I don't read much YA.
I mean, I agree. Although in Lord of the Rings, we still have Arwen and Aragorn, so the romance is there. But
Yeah,
definitely, if the romance is not well crafted, or if it is not, adding something to the story, it's just something that it's not getting interesting. But it's a
yeah.
hot take to start. It's a hot take to start.
I think another thing, and I haven't read much modern YA, but it often feels like modern YA is quite angsty romance,
Yes,
and you
I
don't
know.
know, like, are these friends or are they gonna fall in love? And it's just like, I'm an
Yeah.
adult. Just talk together, please.
Yes. Although I love the answer, but yes.
Neva says, The Lord of the Rings isn't all that great and might be the most boring piece of fantasy ever. Nevia, who hurt you?
Oh, that's
Don't
me.
disagree. What is this?
Um, I mean,
So,
I haven't read it, so I cannot say anything. But from the movies, it definitely seems that it has great adventure, great themes, epic stakes. So to me, that doesn't sound boring. But I
no.
understand that there's lots of details.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not boring, but what I want to say is that I kind of do understand for someone that hasn't read much or reads a lot of modern fantasy
Mm.
that Lord of the Rings can be hard to recommend. And it's actually one of the reasons why I almost never recommend Lord of the Rings, actually, because it's very descriptive, the prose. It's quite slow paced, and yeah, you don't have that modern feel to it at
Yeah,
all. So, yeah, it's definitely maybe a hard recommend, especially to younger readers or people that don't read much. But to
agree.
call it boring, or one of the most boring pieces of fantasy ever is just crazy. You clearly haven't read that much fantasy to say that.
Oh no!
A villain does not have to be emotionally developed or have a good backstory to be compelling. This is an interesting one. I would say I'm somewhere in the middle to disagree. The thing is, Sauron, no one has ever complained that he isn't a good villain, and he doesn't have an emotional backstory or anything, but it kind of does add a bit more depth to the story and to the villain when we know
Yeah,
why he's acting the way he does. But I also
agree.
think that we do have like psychos in our world. Like some people are just plain evil, and it's okay to have that in fantasy as well. So yeah, I think there just needs to be a balance, but it's definitely trendy to have
Yeah.
complex, nuanced villains, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I disagree. Again, I think it's a me thing, but I'm really loving lately these gray characters. Knowing that someone
Mm,
is only good or only bad doesn't work for me as much, and I don't think that's true either.
yeah.
Usually, we do have those cycles, but still, even those, the majority have a tragic childhood, so there's still something there. But to me, understanding or knowing what that person has passed, it just gives so much richness to the story. It's not necessarily that I need to connect with the character, but understanding those motivations really work.
Yeah. And one thing that I almost always appreciate is whenever an author gives a POV to the villain, because I
Yeah.
just find that really fascinating and also helps us to understand both sides of the
Yeah.
conflict. But I do kind of understand that not all villains have to have like an emotionally developed backstory. So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
agree.
interesting opinion. Priory should have been longer than 800 pages. Do you want to go first?
Yes. So
Agree?
agree and disagree at the same time. So to me, I agree because Priory should have been longer. It should have been probably 2 books or a trilogy. It just feels that there's a lot at the beginning that you need to understand a lot of the world, the characters, but then the end happens fairly fast. But then at the same time, because it's just a standalone, it seems pretty long for me. Like it felt as like a weird pacing. A lot happened at the end very fast. The beginning was really slow, and it was like you could have reduced the beginning in half. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the climax of The Pride of the Orange Tree is one of the most rushed climaxes I've ever come across in fantasy.
Absolutely.
And you need like 700 pages of build-up. And I think a lot of the build-up is so unnecessary. So it's one of those things, if the build-up was shortened and the climax was extended, then it would have been perfect. But since Priory is the way it is, then I think she should have written another 100 pages just to, flesh out that climax of the ending a bit more. So yeah, I definitely do kind of understand where you're coming from. Piranesi is extremely overrated. It's a fantasy book for people that don't read fantasy. People are pulling no punches. What is going on? You guys are savage. Dave, are you alright? So I would definitely say that Piranesi isn't overrated, but if you're looking for a Wheel of Time or Lord of the Rings kind of adventure, then Piranesi is definitely not it. It's a very singular plotline that's very atmospheric, heavy on themes, and it's just very, very strange for the most part. But yeah, I think your second point kind of is true. I've actually recommended Piranesi to a lot of people that don't enjoy fantasy, because it's one of those books that it does have fantastical elements to it, but you can kind of argue that those elements aren't fantastical. So I do get where you're coming from, but calling Piranesi overrated is a bit harsh, I think.
Yeah, agreed. Like Piranesi is a favorite to me, and I thought it was gonna hate it, and I understand it's not for everyone because Piranesi is such a unique character approaching life through this scientific observation perspective. Doesn't sound like something really interesting, so I get it's not for everyone, but everything is just wraps up so amazingly. And for the second part, I do agree. I recommend this to one of my best friends, and she was like, where's the fantasy in this? Like she really enjoyed it, but she was kind of like, okay, but this is dark, but fantasy not so much. So
Yeah.
But, please, Piranesi.
Bookish Benny, The Sword of Kaigen is a 2-star book once you get to 60% and only 3 stars before that. Overhype. Man, I think Issa is gonna have something to say about this one.
I mean, no. Sword of Kaigen, it's one of my top favorite fantasy books of all time. I think it's phenomenal. I understand it has lots of stuff that I like. It has a great character development, a feudal Japanese setting, which I really love, elemental magic, which I adore, and the dynamics between the characters are fantastic, phenomenal. There are action scenes that to me rival Sanderson at times, but I understand that it's written in a way that it's fairly different to what we're used to. In my head, for me, it's a book that everyone should read, and it's just a moment of when you should read it. But to me, I love it.
Yeah, I think The Sword of Kaigen is the very definition of an author bringing something new and fresh to the genre. So at least if you don't enjoy the book, then at least I think you could appreciate what the author is doing, because the world building is so unique. Like I do understand you might not enjoy the book, but to say it's overrated. Thought the Jade Legacy trilogy sucked and was a rip-off of The Godfather. So I'm guessing you mean the Green Bone Saga, but mate, Susip03, are you okay? The Green Bone Saga and Jade Legacy is, to this date, one of the best, if not the best conclusion I've ever read to a trilogy. It's just how ambitious Fonda Lee is with that last book. To tell a story that spans over like a decade and tells a story of a generation of Greenbone warriors it is so ambitious, but she just pulls it off. It is beautiful and it's massively handled. So
I cannot agree more. I think it's one of my favorite. Again, it's done in such a good way. I think Fonda Lee did something that it's massive, and it's working on the characterization of these siblings that pass through this war, and there's done in a way that it feels really real. And to me, even though it's fairly slow at moments, it was every time I was so hooked to what I was reading. So to me, it was phenomenal. And as you say, the conclusion, it really changes and it's bigger in scope, and it was chef's kiss. What is happening? What is happening?
Ellen Venture is a for liking Vin, which he looked like a young teen. What?
I'm not sure what to say though. Like,
This is so
disagree?
confusing.
I don't know what to say because I think they don't have that big of a gap between them. I
Well,
think
Is Vin like a child? No, she isn't, right?
no.
She looks like a young teen, but Ellen is. So, if you guys don't know this from the Mistborn trilogy, but Ellen Venture he wasn't that
No.
old, was he? I'm so
No.
confused.
Like 20 years old, and she should be like, yeah, teenager. But still, I think that within fantasy, or at least fantasy romance, you're used to read romances where there's a huge gap between the characters. So I think this is something that we usually overlook in fantasy. But in this
Yeah.
case, I don't think it's as massive. But
No.
man,
I'll tell you what, like the Twilight series is full of because all those vampires are like 400 years old or something. But Ellen
true.
Venture, and I think there's like 4 or 5 years age difference. So, and
God.
clearly Sanderson, he didn't think Ellen was a
No,
either.
no.
Because he never states anything like that at all. So that is
Mm.
hilarious, but I've never heard that before. That is so funny. But no, I disagree.
Disagree
That
as
is
well.
hilarious. Unfaithful adaptations can be better if the show takes it in an interesting direction. I think the most important thing is to tell a really good story.
Yeah.
And I think The Shining is a really good example of actually a really unfaithful adaptation that works brilliantly because the movie is so different from the book, but
Yeah.
both the book and the movie are amazing, but just very, very different. I think what often annoys fantasy fans is when the director takes the direction of the movie in a whole different new way.
To me, one of the examples that I love the most is the Shadow and Bone series. They blended the Six of Crows duology with the Shadow and Bone, and honestly, I think that blend that never happened in the books really, really work. The best thing that we are seeing is these action scenes that we see from Six of Crows, and the story overall that it's created. I think it's way more interesting. And again, as you said, it's a case thing, but I think that if it is well done and it grasps your interest, then it's a good story, and you don't necessarily need to go just hoping to see the same things you imagined in the book.
So that is it. Thank you so much for sharing your hot takes and unpopular opinions. Would you like to see a part 2? Definitely let us know in the comments down below. And thank you so much, Isa, for joining this chat today. It was
Yay.
really, really fun.
Thank you for inviting me. I had a blast.
Awesome. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. And as always, especially thanks to my patrons who support what we do here. I really appreciate it.